The autumn wind howled across the Blackwood farm as Thomas wiped the sweat from his brow, despite the cold. He'd been clearing out the old barn's foundation for weeks now, preparing to expand his property. What he found beneath the rotting floorboards would haunt him forever. Iron chains, thick, heavy links that seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy in the dim afternoon light. They stretched deep into the earth, disappearing into darkness that his flashlight couldn't penetrate. But it wasn't the chains themselves that made his blood run cold. It was what was attached to them. A woman. She appeared to be in her 30s, with pale skin that seemed to glow faintly in the shadows. Her dark hair cascaded over shoulders that bore no marks from the heavy iron shackles around her wrists and ankles. She should have been dead. The barn had been abandoned for over a century, yet her chest rose and fell with steady breathing. "Ma'am?" Thomas called out hesitantly, his voice echoing in the hollow space. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" Her eyes snapped open, deep green, like the depths of an ancient forest. They fixed on him with an intensity that made him step backward involuntarily. "You found me," she whispered, her voice carrying despite its softness. "After so long, someone finally found me." Thomas scrambled down into the pit, his farmer's instincts overriding his fear. This woman needed help, regardless of how impossible her presence seemed. "Don't worry, I'm going to get you out of here," he said, examining the chains. They were old, certainly, but the iron looked strangely pristine. No rust, no corrosion. "Who did this to you? How long have you been down here?" The woman's eyes widened with something that looked like terror. "No," she gasped, struggling against the chains not to break free, but to ensure they remained secure. "Please, you don't understand. You mustn't." "These chains are ancient," Thomas muttered, running his hands along the links. "Probably from the 1802nd. Don't worry, I've got tools that can cut through anything." "Please, don't break my chains," she begged, her voice desperate now. "You have to listen to me. My name is Elena Blackwood, and I am the reason this farm bears that name. I am the reason it has stood empty for over 100 years. Thomas paused. Blackwood. The same name as his property deed, the same name whispered in local legends about the cursed farm that no family could ever work for more than a few seasons. "That's impossible," he said. Elena Blackwood disappeared in 1887. The whole family vanished after he stopped remembering the stories. After the livestock started dying. After the crops withered. After the neighbors claimed to hear screaming in the night. After I became what I am now," Elena finished quietly. "Thomas, yes, I know your name. I've heard you working above me for weeks. You seem like a good man. But if you free me from these chains, you will doom not just yourself, but everyone in a 50-mile radius." Thomas sat back on his heels, studying the woman who claimed to be over 130 years old. In the dim light, she looked no older than 30, her skin smooth and unmarked, despite supposedly being chained in this pit for more than a century. "I don't believe in ghost stories," he said finally. "I'm not a ghost," Elena replied. "I wish I were. Ghosts are just memories, echoes of what once was. What I am is far worse." She closed her eyes, and when she opened them again, they seemed to glow with their own light. "In 1887, I was 28 years old. I had just inherited this farm from my father, and I was determined to make it prosper. The soil was rich, the location perfect, but there was something wrong with the land." Thomas found himself leaning closer, despite every instinct telling him to run. There was a cave system beneath the property, natural limestone caverns that went deeper than anyone had ever explored. I was curious too, curious for my own good. I found things down there, Thomas, things that had been sleeping for thousands of years. The temperature in the pit seemed to drop several degrees. I brought something back with me, something that got inside me, changed me. I became hungry, desperately, endlessly hungry for things that human beings should never crave. Elena's voice took on a hollow quality, as if she was speaking from the bottom of a well. At first, it was just the animals, the chickens, then the cattle. But animals weren't enough. Nothing was ever enough. Thomas felt his mouth go dry. "What happened to your family?" "I killed them," she said simply. "All of them. My husband, my 2 children, my elderly mother. I devoured them, Thomas. Not just their flesh, their essence, their souls, their very life force. And with each life I took, I grew stronger, hungrier, more monstrous. The townspeople came eventually," Elena continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "They found the remains, saw what I had become, but I was too strong for them to kill. The thing inside me had made me nearly immortal." Thomas noticed that the chains seemed to be growing colder, frost forming along the iron links despite the autumn weather above. There was a priest among them, Father Macready. He was old, wise in ways that most men aren't. He understood that some evils can't be destroyed, only contained. Elena lifted her shackled hands slightly. "These chains aren't just iron, Thomas. They're blessed iron, forged in holy fire and bound with prayers older than this country. So you've been trapped here for over a century?" "Not trapped," Elena corrected. "Protected. Every day, every hour, I feel the thing inside me trying to claw its way out. It whispers to me, shows me visions of all the lives I could take, all the souls I could consume. The chains don't just keep me here, they keep it dormant." She looked directly into his eyes. "But the blessing is fading, Thomas. I can feel it weakening with each passing year. The iron grows colder, the bindings looser. Soon, even these chains won't be enough to hold what I've become." Thomas stood abruptly, backing away from the pit. "This is insane. You're just a woman. A sick woman, maybe, but—" "Touch the chains," Elena interrupted. "Put your hand on the iron and tell me what you feel." Against his better judgment, Thomas reached out and grasped one of the links. The cold hit him like a physical blow, but worse was the sensation that followed, a crawling, writhing darkness that seemed to seep into his skin. For just a moment he felt it, an ancient, malevolent presence that regarded him with alien hunger, something that saw him not as a person, but as prey. He jerked his hand back, stumbling backward. "Now you understand," Elena said sadly. "This is why you cannot free me. This is why I must remain chained until the end of time, or until someone finds a way to truly destroy what lives inside me." That night, Thomas couldn't sleep. He paced his farmhouse, Elena's words echoing in his mind. Part of him, the rational part, insisted that he'd experienced some kind of hallucination brought on by stress and exhaustion. But the memory of that crawling darkness refused to fade. He'd left Elena in the pit with a promise to return in the morning with food and water. She'd smiled at that, a sad expression that made her look achingly human. "I don't need food anymore," she'd told him. "Haven't for decades, but I remember what it was like to be hungry for simple things, human things." As dawn broke, Thomas found himself back at the barn, staring down into the pit. Elena was exactly as he'd left her, sitting with her back against the earthen wall, chains draped across her lap like some twisted parody of a medieval princess. "You came back," she said, sounding surprised. "I brought coffee," Thomas replied, lowering a thermos on a rope, "and some sandwiches, in case you were lying about not needing food." Elena accepted the thermos gratefully. "It's been so long since anyone showed me kindness," she murmured. "Most people who found me over the years, well, let's just say they didn't listen to my warnings." "Others have found you?" "3 times. Once in 1923, when a team of surveyors discovered the pit. Once in 1951, when a treasure hunter was exploring the property. And once in 1978, when a family tried to renovate the barn." Elena's expression darkened. They all tried to free me, despite my pleas. They all believed they were doing the right thing. Thomas felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. What happened to them? The thing inside me fed, Elena said simply. It had been dormant for decades, weakened by the chains. But the moment they were broken, it surged forth with a vengeance. I killed them all, Thomas. Every single person who tried to help me. She looked up at him with those impossibly green eyes. Afterward, the surviving townspeople would come. They'd find new chains, stronger blessings. They'd drag me back down here and bind me again. But each time, it gets harder. The blessings don't hold as well. The iron doesn't bite as deep. There has to be another way, Thomas insisted. Some way to help you without setting that thing free. Elena smiled, but it was a broken expression. You really are a good man, aren't you? Even after everything I've told you, you still want to save me. For 3 weeks, Thomas visited Elena daily. He brought her books, newspapers, small comforts that reminded her of humanity. She told him stories of her life before the transformation, her childhood on the farm, her wedding day, the births of her children. The more human she seemed, the more Thomas questioned whether she was really the monster she claimed to be. Maybe the stories about the others were just nightmares, he suggested one afternoon. Maybe you've been alone so long that you've convinced yourself you're dangerous when you're really just a victim. Elena's expression hardened. Touch the chains again, Thomas. He hesitated. The memory of that first contact still made his skin crawl. Touch them, she insisted, but this time don't pull away immediately. Feel what's really down here with me. Thomas reached out reluctantly, grasping the iron links. The cold was immediate, but this time he forced himself to hold on. The sensation of crawling darkness returned, stronger now. And then, like a whisper in his mind, he heard it. Free us. Break the chains. Let us taste the world again. The voice wasn't Elena's. It was something else entirely, ancient, hungry, utterly alien. It spoke of cities consumed, of lives drained to empty husks, of spreading like a plague across the earth until nothing remained but darkness and hunger. Thomas yanked his hand away, gasping. You see, Elena said quietly, it's getting stronger. The chains are failing, just as I told you. Soon, it won't matter whether you free me or not. The bindings will break on their own, and that thing will be loose in the world again. Again? Thomas caught the word. This isn't the first time something like this has happened, Elena explained. The cave system beneath this property is just one of many around the world. They're doors, Thomas. Prisons. And sometimes, the things locked away find a way to influence the world above. She gestured weakly at her chains. The creature that possessed me has been bound in various forms for millennia. Sometimes in caves, sometimes in artifacts, sometimes in people like me. But it's always looking for a way out, always whispering to anyone who might listen. Then we need to find a permanent solution, Thomas said firmly. There has to be a way to destroy it completely. Elena's laugh was bitter. Do you think I haven't tried? Do you think countless priests and scholars and holy men haven't spent their lives searching for answers? Some evils are too old, too fundamental to simply wish away. But Thomas had made up his mind. That evening, he drove into town and spent hours in the library, researching everything he could about the Blackwood farm, about disappearances and strange occurrences in the area. What he found only reinforced Elena's story. The historical records painted a clear picture. The Blackwood family had indeed vanished in 1887, found dead in circumstances that the local newspaper described only as too horrific for Christian minds to comprehend. Over the following decades, the property had changed hands dozens of times, but no one ever stayed long. There were reports of livestock dying in unprecedented numbers, of crops failing despite rich soil, of people having nightmares so vivid they left town rather than sleep another night on the property. And every few decades, There were stories of missing persons people who went to explore the abandoned farm and were never seen again. But Thomas also found something else, a mention in a 1922nd occult journal of similar cases around the world, ancient evils bound by holy artifacts, contained but never truly destroyed. And in one case, a monastery in Tibet, the article claimed that the monks had found a way to not just contain their demon, but to banish it entirely. The next morning, Thomas shared his discovery with Elena. Her reaction was immediate and intense. "No," she said, her voice sharp with panic. "Thomas, you don't understand what you're suggesting. The ritual described in that journal, I've heard whispers of it. It doesn't just banish the demon. It destroys the host as well." "But you'd be free," Thomas argued. "Really free, not just chained up for eternity." "I'd be dead." Elena's eyes flashed with something that might have been fear, or might have been the creature stirring within her. "After all these years of fighting to maintain some semblance of who I was, you're asking me to simply give up?" Thomas knelt at the edge of the pit. "Elena, look at yourself. Really look. You're not living, you're existing. You haven't felt sunlight on your face in over a century. You haven't walked free, breathed fresh air, touched another human being with anything but iron between you and the world." Tears began to flow down Elena's face, the first tears Thomas had seen from her. "I'm scared," she whispered. "What if there's nothing after? What if death means joining with the thing inside me forever? What if it means finally being free of it?" Thomas countered. "Elena, the chains are weakening. You said so yourself. How long before they fail completely? How long before that thing gets loose and kills hundreds, thousands of people?" Elena closed her eyes, and when she opened them again, they seemed clearer somehow, more human. The ritual would require someone to perform it, someone who understands the risks. "I'll do it," Thomas said without hesitation. "Number," Elena's voice was firm. "If it goes wrong, if the creature breaks free during the process, you'll be the first to die. I won't have your death on my conscience, along with all the others." "Then what do you suggest?" Elena was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was barely audible. "There might be another way, but it would require you to trust me completely, and it would put you in terrible danger." Elena's plan was terrifyingly simple. The creature inside her was strongest when she was bound, when it was compressed and contained by the holy iron. But there were moments, brief windows, when she accessed her human memories and emotions, when it retreated deeper into her psyche. "If you could break the chains during one of those moments," she explained, "I might be able to maintain control long enough to complete the banishment ritual myself." The creature would be weakened by the sudden freedom, confused by the change in circumstances. Thomas stared at her. "That's insane. What if you're wrong? What if the thing takes control the moment I break the chains?" "Then you run," Elena said simply. "You run as fast and as far as you can, and you pray that someone stronger than both of us can find a way to stop what I become." For 3 days, Thomas wrestled with the decision. He researched the banishment ritual, memorizing every word and gesture described in the journal. He practiced the pronunciations, gathered what few materials were mentioned. All the while, he could feel time running out. The chains were noticeably colder now. Ice formed on them even during the warmest part of the day. And Elena herself seemed to be changing. Her eyes occasionally flashed with an inhuman light, and sometimes Thomas caught her muttering in a language that hurt to hear. "It's fighting harder," she admitted during one of their conversations. "The creature knows something is coming. It can sense the weakness in the bindings." That night, Thomas made his decision. He gathered his tools, a high-powered metal cutter he'd bought in town, the ritual materials, and a loaded shotgun that probably wouldn't stop a supernatural creature, but made him feel slightly less helpless. As he prepared to descend into the pit one final time, Elena looked up at him with an expression of profound sadness and gratitude. "Thank you," she said. Whatever happens, thank you for seeing me as more than just a monster to be feared." "You're not a monster, Elena," Thomas replied. "You're a woman who's been fighting the real monster for over a century. It's time to end that fight." Thomas positioned himself at the edge of the pit, metal cutter in hand, as Elena began to recite memories from her human life. She spoke of her wedding day, of holding her children for the first time, of quiet mornings working in her garden. With each memory, the unnatural light in her eyes dimmed slightly. "Now," she whispered, "while I can still remember who I was." Thomas activated the cutter and brought it to the first chain link. The moment the blade touched the iron, Elena screamed a sound of pure agony that seemed to come from two voices simultaneously. The human Elena, crying out in pain as the protective barriers fell away, and something else shrieking in rage and hunger. The first link parted with a sound like thunder. Elena's left arm was free, and immediately Thomas saw the change. Her skin took on a grayish pallor, and her fingernails began to elongate into claws. "Hurry!" she gasped, her voice already beginning to distort. "I can feel it rising." Thomas moved to the second chain, then the third. With each severed link, Elena's transformation accelerated. Her teeth sharpened to points, her eyes began to glow with that sickly green light, and an aura of wrongness filled the air around her. But she was also fighting it. Thomas could see the war being waged in her expression, human determination, battling inhuman hunger. She began to recite the banishment ritual, her voice growing stronger with each word, despite the physical changes overtaking her body. The final chain snapped. Elena rose to her feet for the first time in over a century, and the creature inside her roared its triumph. For a moment, Thomas thought they had failed. The thing wearing Elena's face turned toward him with undisguised hunger, and he saw his death reflected in those glowing eyes. But then Elena's voice cut through the darkness, speaking the final words of the banishment with a clarity and power that made the very air around her shimmer. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. Light poured from Elena's body, not the warm light of the sun, but something harsh and cleansing that made Thomas shield his eyes. The creature within her shrieked in voices that seemed to come from 1,000 mouths, raging against the banishment that was tearing it away from its host. Elena herself was caught in the middle of the supernatural storm, her body convulsing as two incompatible forces warred for control. Blood ran from her eyes, her nose, her mouth, as the strain of containing and banishing an ancient evil took its toll. "Elena," Thomas called out, but his voice was lost in the chaos. The light grew brighter, more intense, until Thomas could see nothing but white fire. The sound of the creature's screaming reached a crescendo that shattered every piece of glass in the barn above, then suddenly cut off. Silence fell like a physical weight. Thomas blinked away the after-images, his vision slowly returning. Where Elena had stood, there was now only empty space and the remnants of the chains, their iron links fused into unrecognizable shapes by the supernatural heat. He called her name, but there was no answer. She was gone, whether banished along with the creature or simply destroyed by the process, he couldn't tell. All that remained was a faint outline in the earth where her feet had stood, and a lingering sense that something fundamental had changed in the world. Thomas climbed down into the pit, examining the scorched earth where Elena had made her final stand. Among the fused metal and burned soil, he found something unexpected, a small piece of jewelry, a simple gold locket that had somehow survived the supernatural conflagration. Inside was a photograph of a young woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile, standing beside two small children in a garden full of sunflowers. On the back, in faded ink, were the words, "Elena Blackwood, beloved mother, 1859 to 1887. Not 1887, Thomas realized. Today's date would have to be added to that inscription. Elena Blackwood had finally found her rest. 6 months later, Thomas stood in the same spot where he'd discovered Elena's prison. The pit had been filled in, the barn rebuilt. Where chains and darkness had once held an ancient evil at bay, sunflowers now grew in neat rows, the same variety shown in Elena's locket photograph. The farm prospered as it never had before. The soil seemed richer, the crops grew stronger, and the sense of wrongness that had hung over the property for over a century was finally gone. Neighbors commented on how different the place felt, how welcoming it seemed after decades of being avoided. Thomas kept Elena's locket on his desk, a reminder of the woman who had sacrificed everything to protect others from the monster she carried within her. Sometimes, in the early morning light, he thought he could see her walking among the sunflowers, not as the chained prisoner he'd known, but as the young mother she had been before darkness claimed her. Whether she had found peace in death or had somehow transcended both life and death in her final act of heroism, Thomas couldn't say. But he liked to think that somewhere, in whatever realm awaited those who had fought the good fight against impossible odds, Elena Blackwood was finally, truly free. The chains were broken, the evil banished, and a good woman's long vigil was finally over. As autumn turned to winter and winter gave way to spring, the sunflowers grew taller and stronger, reaching toward the sun with a determination that reminded Thomas of their namesake, a woman who had faced a century of darkness and never stopped believing in the light.